Here's Michael Smerconish.
Hey, gang, did you hear about those four friends, businessmen from Atlanta, who embarked on a river rafting trip on the Cohulawasi River to explore the Georgia mountain wilderness before it was flooded by the construction of a dam? So they're looking for their launch site. The group gets lost. They come to a hamlet. It's got a gas station. There are locals there who are barefoot, dirty, backward, and inbred, barely able to utter complete sentences, but somehow whizzes at playing the banjo. The men get their gas, they find the launch site, they head off, only to be tracked down by two of the locals. When finally confronted, the rustics are seen to be not interested in the men's money or fancy camping gear, but instead hell-bent on terrorizing the city boys, taking their depravity to a new level. Even by Hollywood standards, one of the businessmen is sodomized, all the while being forced to squeal like a pig. As a matter of fact, it was Ned Beatty. Yeah, I've just read to you a summary of Deliverance, a phenomenal movie from 1972. And the passage that I've just read comes from a brand new, terrific book. It's called The Rural Voter, The Politics of Place and the Disuniting of America. Nicholas Jacobs and Daniel Shea, both from Colby College, are the authors of this book, and they join me now. Gentlemen, I'm so glad that you had this discussion in the book, because you talk about how we went, culturally speaking, in the eyes of Hollywood and cultural influencers, from a world of the Andy Griffith Show and Green Acres and maybe Petticoat Junction 2 to all of a sudden Deliverance. And the point is that this has all had an impact on the way rural voters are perceived. Who can expand on that?
Well, thanks, first off, Michael, for having us on your program. I'm a big fan. We love that you're balanced and independent, and it's just what we need to have when we're talking about rural voters. That's a tough scene in that movie. If you're from rural areas, if you're from Appalachia, that's a tough hit. But it is indicative of the change that we've seen. So we embark on this project, a data-driven, objective analysis of the politics of rural America. We put together a massive elections data set. We go all the way back to 1800 at the county level, data all the way through, so we can see the changes, the trends. And then we talk to 14,000 Americans, 10,000 of which are rural, to try to pin down this story. But you're absolutely right. The key part of it is a change that happens, we think, really by the 1980s. I think it's indicative. So another spot in the book, we talk about how Take Me Home, Country Roads comes out in 1972. It zooms to the top, right? Denver song zooms to the top on both the pop and country charts. And then a decade later, you get Hank Williams Jr.'s A Country Boy Can Survive, which is so different. The tone of thinking about rural politics, of connecting urban and rural, it is so different. We go from the Waltons and from Green and from Little House on the Prairie and so forth, to all the horror films that are always set in rural America by the 1980s. So you're right. That's the first piece of it. I would say you captured this transition period.
The perception among many who are not in rural America is that they're all flying a Trump flag. Everybody's got a pickup truck. They're all extremists. They're supportive of Donald Trump and the events of January 6th. And I'll just give the audience my conclusion from the book. Again, data-driven, is rural Americans are much like every other segment of our society. There are extremists among them, and those extremists seem to be the ones who command the most attention. But frankly, the issues are the same there as they are in every other part of the country. I appreciated the fact that Morris Fiorina blurbed your book, because I know his work. And Unstable Majorities is a very important book to me, which points out that in the last 50 years, there hasn't been a sea change in this country in terms of how we look at the issues. And that's pretty much what you're saying about rural voters.
You're absolutely right, Michael. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about that perspective. It's not as salacious as some other works out there that play into this myth that we are deeply divided and there's nothing we can overcome or do to overcome those divisions. There are differences in rural America. Dan and I spent a good amount of time talking about those differences. But I think you're right. At the end of the day, we write this book about a rural-urban divide in partisanship that's undeniable. Right, come election day, and certainly if you're watching the news on election night, you can see the maps, right? You can see that urban areas are voting differently than rural areas. But much of that divide is in our heads. Much of it is about perceptions that we have built up over time from cultural depictions, as we started out this hour talking about, but also political depictions, right? That this divide exists partially because certain politicians of a certain stripe with a certain agenda benefit from it and help to fabricate it and build it up over time. But what Dan and I do is what no other book out there, I think, does, which is ask rural people what they really think. And when you give people an opportunity to speak for themselves, right, not to respond to the cliche that's being thrown at them, not to sort of hit a talking point that's circulating in the media at any one moment, when you give rural folks and urban and suburban just an opportunity to speak about the issues that they're concerned about, you're right. The things that are on the minds of rural voters are on the minds of urban voters. The things that are affecting suburban voters and what they're anxious about, their concerns for the future, what they want to see government do, are the things that rural people want as well. This isn't the land of extremism. It's a deeply integral part of America.
There's no doubt that things have changed. Maybe it's the 70s, maybe it's the 80s forward, because in the not too distant past, there were Democratic elected officials in rural America at the local level, but they are in very short supply now. Why? What did happen?
Well, it's great that you picked up on that, because a lot of people rush right to Donald Trump, presidential races, maybe senatorial. We spent a lot of time taking a look at state legislative races. So you're right. The transformation is across the board, beginning in the 1980s and extending forward, and it's up and down the ballot. So yeah, so when I was a kid, there was a lot of progressive. I mean, remember George McGovern was from South Dakota. Our students can't quite get their arms around that. A lot of progressive candidates from the upper Midwest, for example, and at the local level. So we have seen this change. One of the roots of that change, we argue, is this nationalization of the rural voter, right? Whereas there used to be dramatic regional differences, now it's uniform. Beginning really in the 1980s, we see this uniform shift. Now, there are a few places in America. New England is a good example, Vermont, communities that are a minority residents tend to be a bit more democratic, or those rural areas that rely heavily on tourism, think ski, golf, fly fishing, and so forth. But other than that, with those few exceptions, they are Republican, and they're Republican to the core, and that is different. It is unprecedented American history, and the book strives to understand that, Michael. Yes,
I'm glad that you use the word the nationalization of the rural voter. I think the same thing probably could be said of urban voters, suburban voters, and that first ring of suburbia as well. But one of the reasons for the nationalization of the voter, and you deal with this too, is so much of rural America has become a news desert. I saw data recently from Medill at Northwestern that spoke to how many newspapers we've lost across the country and how many of them come from rural America. And when people don't have a local news source to go to remind them of the commonality of that community, then they're going to their national cable station of choice. And there's a vignette in the book. It singles out the network where I'm affiliated, but I'm going to read it anyway because I thought it was really insightful. Visual media are even worse. Newspaper or television stories of rural politics nearly always profile the outspoken, the guy with the really big Trump billboard, or the gal who refuses to sit down during the town hall meeting. In the fall of 2020, CNN sent a reporter to rural Pennsylvania to touch base with voters in a pivotal county that Donald Trump needed to win. The opening shot of the story, plastered all over the start of the article, was the Trump house. Clad in work jeans and a ball cap, the owner of the house, Leslie Rossi, stands in front of his massive two-story dwelling, which is painted red, white, and blue, draped with American flags over the roof, the windows, the doors. The lawn is littered with signs for Republican candidates, particularly for the top of the ticket. And then there's more to the discussion. And as somebody who does television work, like, I get it. That guy is good TV, but if you're only showing that guy on TV, then the perception is rural America is only red state folks.
So you pick up on two important aspects, right? First is that with the decline of local news, right, the coverage of rural America is almost solely dependent now on reporters coming in from the outside. Now, Dan and I think we say that in the chapter that you read from, we think these reporters are doing the work of helping our democracy, right? There's no malevolent intent here. There's no ill will. They are trying to cover their story, meet their deadlines, but they're not from rural places. And so when you show up and you're trying desperately to get that, on the street interview, get the perspective of what's on people's minds, right? It happens again and again and again. You're the only people that are actually willing to talk to you, person from away, person from a big national news organization that, for the second reason I'll say in a second, we don't trust. The only person that's going to talk to you is the extreme voice in the community, and those extreme voices that are not representative of the average rural voter. So you have a problem at the news organizational level and what type of news is being covered. But then you see it within the community among rural people themselves. And we mentioned, there's so many things that unite rural and urban America, but on one thing in particularly, we find rural Americans are very different than the average American. They are much more likely to just not follow the news because they say the news that is presented to them is irrelevant to their community. So because of those institutional problems and how media covers rural areas, rural people, some of them are being driven to more extreme sources and more dependent on national news. That is problematic. But the other side of it that I don't think we talk enough about is a lot of rural people are just dropping out entirely, and they distrust the news because it's covering them like that.
Nicholas Jacobs and Daniel Shea, let me just get this in, are the co-authors of The Rural Voter, The Politics of Place and the Disuniting of America. By the way, I should point out, both live in rural America, in Maine, but they are both rural residents. I'm sorry, I stepped on something you were about to say.
Well, thanks for mentioning that rural credential. It is pretty odd, rare for academics. But what I was going to say, Nick's summary is real good, but there's another piece. They are tuning off, but a lot of the book confronts resentment, confronts a feeling among rural residents that those in non-rural areas, suburban city areas, they don't understand their lifestyle. They don't get it right. Part of that has to do with the popular culture, the entertainment piece we talked about. And it's also they see these depictions in the media and they say, that's not us. That's not us. You've mentioned this twice, Michael, which it's a group that we call the rural rabble-rouser. We think it makes up about 10%, maybe 8 to 10% in rural communities. They are the loud. They are the ones that are there. Hey, it's great that they're loud and they're vocal. This is, First Amendment, free speech, this is great. But the problem is when they're depicted as the rural resident, that's a problem. It's a problem for outsiders looking in, and it creates resentment in rural America.
And we then, on the outside of rural America, looking at the community writ large, we tend to think that he's indicative or she's indicative, like the guy with the Trump house in Pennsylvania. I'm a Pennsylvanian. I didn't recognize that guy. I didn't recognize my state in that guy. I remember that story. Hey, there's another misperception that you address in the book. Non-rural folks looking at rural voters assume that they are proportionately much more religious than the rest of us, but they're not, correct?
Yeah, so religion is on the decline throughout American society. We tend to attribute greater religiosity to rural voters, in particular, I think because of these images that have been created over time that, come Sunday, everybody is marching off to church. I mean, that's where you do see religiosity in religious or in rural communities. It is predominantly Christian. But you know, we've seen similar declines in membership in organized faiths in rural communities as we've seen them in other communities. I think actually one of the biggest myths that we've talked about a lot with people who have read our book, right, is especially as it relates to evangelicalism, right? We got this image in our heads that these are the folks that are showing up in mass to the big mega churches and supporting mega church pastors. And Dan and I, at one point, we just thought it would be interesting to ask rural residents, like, what do you think about that type of um, gathering, right? Like evangelical mega church pastors. And believe it or not, rural residents are some of the most not hostile, but like cold. They do not feel very warmly to that type of religious organization, and also that they're not present in rural communities, right? That's a type of group meeting that is much more likely that can only really survive in a suburb or on the fringes of a big city. I also think we overlook quite frequently the level of religiosity that still remains in urban areas, right? Not everybody that lives in an urban community is the 25-year-old, person that has, left the church. Right. If you travel throughout New York City, for instance, you will see deep pockets of religiosity in a lot of communities. Right, devout Catholics as well as devout Protestants. Where there is religion in America, it seems to be present throughout, but it's on the decline everywhere, including in rural America.
There's no magic bullet in the book. It's not as if you offer the prescription for how we put the country back together and make rural America feel appreciated and everybody get along. But my audience knows I'm on a kick of sorts that I call the Mingle Project, trying to point out to people how an era of connectedness through smartphones and technology has made us more disconnected than we've ever been in the past. And something else in the book jumped out at me on this. You say, when we fail to acknowledge the interconnectedness, we make it all too easy to split ourselves into warring tribes. So I don't know if it's Nick or I don't know if it's Dan, but somebody please say something about what do we do to try and make the nation realize that rural America's got its extremists in the same way that suburbia and urban America do, and there's a lot more that unites us across the board than divide us.
Well, I appreciate that. I wish I did have a silver bullet. Dan and I sat down and thought long and hard and really, really wished we could offer something more than, we all have to engage in this project of understanding that the images that we have in our heads about the other are usually the images that have been put there for some nefarious reason, because somebody else profits or benefits from those divisions. I think there should be a healthy amount of skepticism. I think Americans, by and large, are skeptical of a lot of things. And I'd like us to start using that skepticism when we think about the other, right? When we think about people that we don't, on a day-to-day basis, engage with. And consider the fact that when we read about the Trump house might not be indicative of the people in the countryside. So I appreciate the opportunity to come out and speak about the things that unite us rather than divide us. I'm very aware of how difficult that is. And that's why I think the rural-urban divide is especially toxic to American politics, because it's not just, I'm watching this news source and you're watching that news source, but our kids are sort of going to the same school and playing. This is a physical divide that keeps us from seeing how good, honest people are living their lives in very similar ways. And so I just sort of, it seems like a cop out in all honesty. I just hope we can all remember that going forward and just be a little bit more skeptical about that image you see in the media that's trying to portray other America as so vastly different to get the clicks, to get you to read the story, because it is a more interesting story than, hey, we actually have a lot more in common. Let's think about those problems
Totally
instead.
agree. Totally
but
agree.
It's a false story.
Yeah, it's a false story.
story.
And something else that I'll just piggyback and then thank you both for your time. It's not only that the media landscape has a vested interest, and people who do what I do behind microphones have a vested interest in perpetuating the perception of a divide because it keeps eyes and ears trained on their product and clicks on their website. It's also the politicians and those who are part of the political community, and you talk about this, you identify this in the book as well, that it suits their interests to perpetuate the divide and to make sure that a state is totally blue or totally red. So they're all working in concert against us, and we need to keep that in mind. Anyway, hopefully you can tell I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I wish you good things with it. It's called The Rural Voter. Nicholas Jacobs and Daniel Shea are the authors. There's my tabbed copy. Thank you, men. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much.
Gang,
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.